Good morning, guys. Hey, it's Mr. Stewart, and this is going to be the Integrity Lecture for Week 3 for Intro to Security. And today I'm going to talk a little bit more about one chapter and a little bit less about another one. So the one I'm going to talk more about is going to be Chapter 4, which has to do with legal and ethical considerations. And then Chapter 5, I'm not going to get real deep into it in the lecture because I want to make sure you read it and understand Chapter 5. And then I'll be happy to entertain questions if you have or anything in discussion boards you want to talk about in regard to that, which has to do with risk management. And I actually teach a whole semester-long class on risk management, so we're going to just kind of be scratching the surface of risk management in this class and just introducing it as a part of security. We're not going to go into a lot of detail about risk management like I do in the other class. So right off the bat, I'm going to jump in here to Chapter 4, Legal and Ethical Considerations. Now, what we're talking about here, first of all, is understanding the law, making sure that you obey it, and also understanding ethics in regard to security work, because there's a whole lot of ways that you could act immoral or unethical on the job. I mean, it could be something as walking out with a pencil that belongs to your employer. If it wasn't given to you, that's unethical, and it also could be illegal. It could be considered theft. So let's just, to begin with, talk about kind of the law just a little bit. Law and liability in the United States. We need to understand the difference between the criminal system and the civil system. The criminal law deals with offenses against the public, and it fixes punishment for them. This is when you have broken one of the criminal laws, such as speeding, such as murder, such as robbery, such as theft, such as selling or possessing drugs, such as DUI. All of those things are considered violations of the criminal law, and when you get caught violating the criminal law, you actually get a punishment, which is probably the removal or at least a temporary taking away of some of your rights, like your freedom. We put you in jail, in prison. We may take some of your money, as in a fine, or we could possibly take your life if it's a death penalty offense. Now, different from the criminal law is the civil law. The civil law deals with offenses against individuals. These are called torts, and they seek restitution for the victim. And what we're really talking about here is that this is a wrong between two people. You know, I like to use the example. I used to have an old beater pickup truck that I drove around when I lived in Colorado, and let's say I sold that pickup truck to a guy, and I said, man, this is the greatest truck ever. And and he bought it, and he gets 3 blocks away from the house, and the transmission falls out from under it, and the carburetor falls off, and the wheels fall off, and he comes back beating on my door because I sold him a piece of crap. And I say, hey, you bought it, it was yours. So he decides to sue me. That's where lawsuits come into play, is in the civil system. And he's going to sue me, saying, well, I misrepresented that truck, and it was junky, and so therefore, not only do I owe him the money back that he paid me for the truck, but maybe I owe him money for pain and suffering and damages, or time and effort lost in order to get the truck and all this stuff. That doesn't mean he's going to win, because most time you buy a used car, it's as is. You get that taillight warranty basically, which means once you go out the driveway and I see your taillights, it's yours, and whatever happens to it's your problem. But I'm just using that as an example. All right, so that is the difference between the civil law and the criminal law. And also in the civil law, you don't get punished. You simply just have to pay damages. It's about money. You pay money to somebody because you wronged them in some shape, form, or fashion. And understand that anybody can sue anybody else at any time for anything they choose. The court doesn't look at the viability or the veracity of the claim until it gets to court. So somebody could look at me wrong, and I could probably find a reason to sue that person. honestly. I had a cousin of mine, it's pretty embarrassing to say this is a relative, but I had a cousin of mine who flipped the bird to somebody else going down the road. Well, the person took it personal, as a personal attack on them. They got her tag number, figured out who she was, and sued her for flipping them off going down the road. Of course, it went to court, and the judge looked at both of them and says, "Are you people crazy? You don't sue somebody because they shoot you a bird. There's no reason to do that, none whatsoever." But yet, that's just a prime example of how anybody can sue anybody else for anything at any time. Whether you win or whether you lose, that's going to be up to the court. Now, also understand that in criminal cases, you get found guilty or not guilty. In civil cases, you either win, one side either wins or loses. And there's a difference in the level of proof necessary, because we're going to take some of your rights away in criminal court. We have to prove that case beyond a reasonable doubt, which means 90% or better proof positive that you did that crime. In the civil system, we only have to tip the scales in favor of one side or the other. We don't have to, one side doesn't have to be way up or way down. We just have to tip the scales in favor of one side or the other, and whichever way the scales are tipped, that's the winner. Whichever side they're not, that's the loser. Typically, the loser is going to have to pay the winner some money, and that's just the way that works. So there's three categories of civil offenses. You have what we call strict liability offenses. Those refer to instances where a person is held liable, even though they may not have knowingly done anything wrong. The simple fact that they did something wrong, whether they knew it or not, is enough to sue them. Then you have what we call an intentional tort, and that's an illegal act. Not really illegal. I guess it would be illegal in the civil system. It's not illegal criminally. It could be criminal. It could amount to being criminal. Most of the time, an intentional tort is just something that you did on purpose, knowing that it would cause damage to somebody else. And then you also have negligence, and that's a failure to use due care to prevent foreseeable injury or damages. An example of negligence from a criminal perspective might be driving 110 miles an hour down the highway. If you're driving 110 miles an hour on the highway, you know you can't stop as quick as if you were driving 50. And let's say you have an accident and you hurt someone. You would be liable criminally because you should have known that driving 110 miles an hour is not conducive to a safe environment, and the likelihood that somebody would be injured is high. You could also be sued civilly to have to pay for the damages that you caused to that victim that you had an accident with. And it's all because you were just negligent. You didn't do what you should have done when you should have done it, basically. Understand that there are differences between the states in regard to what really constitutes negligence, but there's 5 basic elements to negligence, typically. The existence of some duty owed. That means that, hey, you knew what you were supposed to do. You knew that there was something that was supposed to happen, and you knew you were supposed to do it. Number 2, the foreseeable likelihood of an incident occurring. You knew that if you didn't do what you were supposed to do, something bad might happen. You failed to meet a reasonable standard of care, which means, hey, I didn't do what I was supposed to do. And then you have the proximate results, something bad happened. And then you have damages. How much money are you going to have to pay to make good on what it was that was bad that happened? And here's an example of this. O.J. Simpson. You guys might remember good old O.J. O.J. Simpson was charged criminally with killing his wife and her little buddy named Ron Goldman. He was not convicted criminally for killing his wife and Ron Goldman. Their families, in turn, sued O.J. for wrongful death. And there is a civil statute in most states called wrongful death, and they're saying that O.J. Should have known that that his conduct would have caused their death. He engaged in conduct that did cause their death. He didn't meet a reasonable standard of care. The death was caused, and so therefore he needed to pay them money. And he lost that lawsuit. He actually did have to pay Nicole Brown Simpson's and Ron Goldman's families money for wrongful death. Now, that doesn't bring them back, but, you know, if you can't put somebody in prison, the next best thing, I guess, is to stand in their pocketbook, so to speak. You know, hit them where it hurts is typically that, you know, that whole idea when you can, if you can't put them in prison, let's just take their money. So those are the elements of negligent liability. Typically, the security industry is rife with lawsuits. And in many cases, because somebody did something wrong. A security professional did something wrong or incorrect. And what we are typically seeing is, you know, they either were not trained on something that they did, or they did not use their training, or they did something that was in direct opposition to their training. All three of those can get you sued. Common civil lawsuits brought against private security: assault. You know, if you arrest somebody as a citizen, they can sue you if you hurt them. Defamation, that typically means defamation of character. What we're talking about there is if you say something about somebody and it gets back to them and it causes them some harm. False imprisonment. You put handcuffs on somebody as a private security officer and you shouldn't have, that's false imprisonment. You can be sued for that. Intentional infliction of emotional distress. You know, maybe cursing someone or arresting them for no good reason. That can cause emotional distress. If some of you may have been arrested at some point, and if that's the case, I mean, you know, it can cause you some stress for sure. Invasion of privacy, looking through your stuff when you shouldn't, looking through their stuff when you shouldn't. Malicious prosecution, maybe making an arrest and trying to prosecute somebody for something that before you knew they did it for sure, or maybe they didn't do it. I don't know. Or negligence. Negligence is probably one of the biggies here. You know, not doing something that you should have done and knowing that not doing it would have likely resulted in some damage somewhere. So negligence is a biggie. Federally, you can violate people's federal civil rights. This is called a Section 1983 lawsuit. This act passed in 1871 says that anyone acting under the authority of local or state law who violates another person's constitutional rights can be sued. Some of you might remember the Rodney King case where the Los Angeles police officers beat up a motorist named Rodney King who was intoxicated and high. The officers actually did nothing wrong according to their department policy. They followed their department policy to a T. The problem was department policy was bad. And they were charged criminally for assaulting Rodney King. They were not convicted. That was the impetus for the riots in Los Angeles in the early 1990s. Rodney King in turn sued those officers for violating his federal civil rights and won. And here's the bad part about federal civil rights violations. You can go to federal prison for this. It can be criminal. You may have to pay money damages, but it can also be criminal. So I think some of those officers end up going to a federal prison for about a year or so for that. Again, the interesting part about that is the fact that they didn't violate state law and they didn't violate department policy, but yet they ended up getting the short end of the stick because the policy was a bad policy. But I guess sometimes that's the way it works. Use of force is another big issue for security. You're not police. You do not have immunity that the police officers do if you put your hands on someone, or if you deploy a chemical weapon, or if you deploy a taser, or if you have to shoot someone. You do not have the same protections that a police officer does. And so you just understand that if you use force against somebody, you are likely to be sued. Doesn't mean you're going to lose the lawsuit, but it just means you're likely to be sued for sure. It can happen. So anytime you use force, the likelihood of getting sued rises immensely. So it's imperative that officers use what's called a use of force continuum. And basically what a use of force continuum says that you start at one particular level, and if certain criteria are met, you move up to the next level of force. Your book does a real good job of explaining that, as does the use of force continuum here in the PowerPoint. So I'm not going to go into that use of force continuum, but I do want you to make sure you look at it, and if you have questions, feel free to ask. Liability and having armed personnel. We see that the greatest majority of security officers are not armed, and the reason is because when you put a gun on a security officer, they're not a police officer, but you're entering a weapon into every situation that officer is in, and in many cases that weapon becomes the go-to tool, and can cause you to the officer as well as the company and maybe even the employer to get sued if somebody were to get shot by an armed security officer. So the likelihood of an officer having to use a firearm is increasing, and since the likelihood to use a firearm is increasing, the likelihood that you're going to get sued if you use a firearm is also increasing. Many agencies are not using lethal technology at this point. They're using less than lethal weapons such as tasers instead of firearms, because you shoot somebody, it's pretty likely that they could die if you shoot them the way you've been taught to shoot them. If you tase somebody, yes, they can still die if they have a heart problem or they happen to be high on a stimulant or something like that, but most people survive tasers. Many people don't survive gunshot wounds, especially to center mass. So less than lethal weapons are those designed not to kill, but death could result from their use, and so therefore proper training needs to happen. If you use any weapon and you have not been properly trained on it, not only can you be held liable, but so can the security company that allowed you to carry that weapon before proper training was conducted. Less lethal weapons, other less lethal weapons, tear gas, pepper gas, tasers, shooting bean bags or rubber slugs, using a baton, an impact weapon, something like that. Just understand all of those. If you use any of those, you open yourself up to liability. Now, I'm not telling you that so that you won't use it. I'm telling you that so that you use it judiciously, so that you use it correctly. You use it according to how you're trained on its use, and if you're not trained on its use, don't carry it. I can remember working in security many years ago, and that's when LAPD was carrying the PR-24, the Monadnock Protect and Restrain 24-inch side handle baton. That was the thing to have. I bought one, and I carried it. I had not been properly trained on it, and if I had used it on somebody, if I'd ever used it on somebody, I know that I would have gotten myself and the security company sued. They didn't give us the training. I didn't have the training. I was carrying that particular weapon with no training, and luckily, knock on wood, I never had to use it. So what are some trends in security liability lawsuits? The increase in exposure and importance of security since 9/11 has had a twofold effect on the industry. Along with the gain in importance, it's also become a greater target for lawsuits. There's much more money in the security field now than there ever has been in the past, and because of that, anytime that there's money in the field, it's a target for lawsuits because somebody wants to get some of that money. They think, well, your pockets are deep. You can afford to give us a settlement here and there. because you did something wrong, or because we say you did something wrong. Some of the more common lawsuits: inadequate security, not providing enough security. And this is where typically, the employer might get sued. Let's say you have a parking lot, and that parking lot is dark, and you don't have security officers, and somebody gets sexually assaulted or physically assaulted in the parking lot, or carjacked in the parking lot. They could turn around and sue the company for saying you didn't provide a safe working environment where this wouldn't happen. You also can have crimes committed by employees. These are the things you don't hear about, though. Let's say you have an employee who goes off and shoots a bunch of people. You typically don't hear about the victim's family suing the company because they hired that person to begin with. They should have known this person was unstable, that they were going to engage in that. But that happens all the time. How can you reduce liability? Well, in your hiring process, hire good quality people. Set standards. Have clear policies. Train your personnel correctly. Transfer some of that risk using insurance, and create a liability checklist that you use on a regular basis. It's important that you do those things as a way to protect yourself from civil liability. If you are sued, there's a possibility that it may not be you. It may not be your fault, although you are mentioned in the lawsuit. And what happens sometimes is that you can go in and ask for something called a summary judgment, which basically says, hey, judge, I don't have anything. I was doing what I was trained. I was doing what the company said, so I shouldn't be sued. And what the judge will do is remove you from the lawsuit and transfer the lawsuit to the employer who need to be sued probably anyway. Yet there are some defenses if you are sued. If you didn't intend to deprive somebody of constitutional rights, or if you acted in good faith, or you used reasonable judgment at the time, many courts will side in your favor. You may have ended up doing something wrong, but what happens is that if you didn't know you were doing it wrong, or you were taking steps to try to avoid doing wrong and it happened anyway, then the court may not say that's your fault. They may say it is, but they may not say it is too. It could happen. All right, that's all really I want to talk about in regard to civil liability. I want to talk about ethics here for just a minute. Engaging in proper ethical behavior is also very important to protecting against civil liability too. Because if you go out and you're doing stuff that's also unethical, it may also be illegal. It may be setting you and your company up for civil liability or even criminal liability. Here's a quote here. It says, "There's no right way to do a wrong thing." And there's a lot of truth in that. If it's wrong, it's wrong. There's a lot of right ways to do things, but there's no right way to do something that is in and of itself wrong or incorrect. And so therefore, each and every one of us must establish our own personal set of ethical standards and morality. And they're all different, guys. That's something that you need to understand, is that everybody's moral standards are a little different. They may line up on a lot of points, but I'm probably going to do something that you may find unethical, or you may do something that I might find unethical or immoral. But to you, it's completely fine, and you justified that. I'm not here to judge on your ethics or your moral systems, but you need to understand that you need to have one. A lack of a system of morality is definitely going to get you sued. It's definitely going to probably get you hated, and maybe even get you killed. So ethics refers to standards or principles of fair, honest conduct. And basically it's about what's right and what's wrong, what you should do on the job, what you should not do on the job. And here's an example. I saw a little article on Facebook yesterday. A little town in New Mexico, a little town, 1,500, 2,000 people. And their police chief apparently had a sexual encounter with somebody inside a fire hall inside an ambulance that was parked in the fire hall. And the way that that came out was one of the other police officers did not like the chief, and he wanted to try to get the chief fired. So he set up a camera, a hidden camera in the fire hall, and actually caught this chief of police having a sexual encounter with this woman inside the back of an ambulance in the fire hall. When the whole thing shook out, guess who got fired? It wasn't the chief. It was the officer who set up the camera, because the officer broke 3 different criminal laws by setting up the camera. He shouldn't have been in the fire hall. He didn't have a key. He misrepresented himself to get a key to get in. He set the camera up, and then he released it to the public instead of just taking it to the mayor. The chief was not fired. Was the chief's actions illegal? Nope. Were they unethical? Of course. You know, the good thing, I guess, is that he didn't do it while he was on duty. He was in plain clothes. He wasn't representing the police department, but still, it's just not something you ought to be doing. And then the guy that ratted him out got fired because he went straight to the public with it. And made the city have a black eye instead of taking it to the mayor and letting the mayor handle the whole thing, or the city council handle the whole thing. So ethics may include a system of moral principles or values, rules or standards governing the conduct of a profession, or accepted standards of right and wrong. Almost every professional organization has some sort of code of ethics. If you become a psychologist, you have the American Psychological Association Code of Ethics. If you become a security professional and you join ASIS, American Society for Industrial Security, they have a code of ethics. Police officers swear to uphold a code of ethics as well. So, you know, it's one of those things that we take very, very seriously. Many questions of ethics are in regard to morality. And moral standards are really individual. I mean, yes, as a society, we have some moral standards, some definite things that we will accept or not accept. But everybody's pretty well left up to each his own, coming up with their own system of morals and what they consider to be right, wrong, or otherwise. And it is open to interpretation to a certain degree, and it's very individualistic. But you need to develop a system of morality, a moral system, an ethical system, and then you need to abide by that. You know, you need to say, here's what I will do, here's what I will not do, and you need to always be kind of keeping that in the back of your mind. When you're developing this system of morality, you need to use these ethics check questions. Is it legal? Is it balanced? And how does it make me feel about myself? And anytime you're engaging in an activity or a behavior, if you ask those 3 questions and you answer them, then you're probably going to be pretty ethical. You know, if it's legal, yes, good. Is it balanced? Yes. That means you know, I'm not one-sided, I'm not single-minded or whatever. It's a balanced approach to something. If it is, good. Check mark, check mark. Number 3. This one's the one that is so open to interpretation we can't really say one way or the other on it. How does it make me feel about myself? If you have a good system of morality and you do something that ends up being wrong or unethical, you should feel bad about it. You know, if you're religious, we call that conviction. You've been convicted about it. You know, you're conflicted. You know that, man, I shouldn't have done that. That makes me feel terrible. But there's some people that don't feel. There's some people that do wrong things and it doesn't bother them a bit. You know, their system of ethics and morals is different than yours and mine. When you're developing an ethical system in regard to an organization, you need to ask these questions. Are we delivering what we promise in terms of quality and service? Are we selling a product or service that's harmful to society? And are we honest in the way we do business? The whole idea behind ethics, guys, is honesty. Doing something that's above board, honest, and not illegal and not just plain wrong. A code of ethics is a well thought out and written kind of what we would consider a canon, C-A-N-O-N, that gives us a set of recommendations and policies to go by, saying here's what we will do in this situation, here's what we will not do, here's how we will act, here's how we will not act. So make sure you read. There's a sample of those, I think, in your textbook as well. Here's a sample here also from As Is. You should use that code of ethics in your decision-making process. And what I'm saying there is that you will have dilemmas from time to time. And what a dilemma is something in which there's no easy answer. You can't just say, hey, I know it's wrong and I know I'm not going to do that. That's one of those things where, man, this option A is real attractive. It might be kind of wrong, but boy, that sounds good. Or option B as well. So that's what makes it a dilemma, is you don't really know the right thing to do. However, if you have a good, strong ethical and moral code, you won't have as big of an issue making that decision as you would some other time. All right. That's pretty much all I wanted to touch on in regard to the Integrity Lecture for this week. Please read that next chapter as well, chapter 5, and I want to look at something here just a minute. We're in week 3. All right, so just remember to get your usual weekly work done. Look at the PowerPoints, read your chapters. Please read the chapters, guys. Post to the discussion boards, and then find that article in regard to material and post that as well. If you have any questions, please reach out through course messages. You can come by my office or give me a call. Have a good week, guys, and I will see you later. Bye-bye.